Hello everyone. A common mistake I see demos have, and usually the second that it happens and I'm reviewing, I'll be like, oh, that trap is too passive, or you're caught here. And those are actually two sides of the same coin, which is how aggressively or passively they are standing and positioning and putting their stickies for a sticky trap. Because there is going to be some variation therein. And that's what I want to talk about today, because I realize I've talked about sticky traps before, as in what makes traps good, like what criteria you should try and meet for setting a sticky trap in order to make it as successful as possible and as intelligent as possible, because it does require some element of kind of reading your opponents. But, and I've also talked about like blind bets as well, for that matter, but I haven't actually talked about when you actually want to be trapping things and what that looks like, because there's plenty of variation between how aggressively and passively you set up your sticks. So for starters, as far as when you trap things, it's basically exclusively in sort of disad situations. Any scenario in which you're expecting to lose space, or in some evens situations. Typically if you're the defending team, because when you're the defending team in an even Ubers situation, you're not the team that gets to control the pace of the game necessarily. You're not the team that gets to sack when you want. It's usually a counter sack when they lose their sacker. So as a result, you're kind of waiting on the other team and having traps on doorways and things like that. Maybe even like anti-bomb traps to try and kill the sacking soldier. All make sense then. But basically any situation in which you're expecting to concede space or want to hold a door are situations in which traps are good to get up. And this is most common in something like Uber disad or player disad. Now that being said, when you're expecting to lose space, well, you don't want to be so forward that you are caught to the team that you are conceding space to, right? That's a really big deal, because you as the demo are such an important class that yes, well, we'll get to that point in a moment. Basically, you don't want to be caught. You want to make sure that you have adequate time to set up whatever stickies you need, and then position somewhere safely. In some cases, this can be setting up traps while in a safe position if you really just don't have time at all, and those are going to be very passive traps. So what is the difference between a passive trap and an aggressive trap? An aggressive trap is usually, on the doors themselves that the opponents are likely to get through, or in some cases you can have it even more aggressively and like a little bit deeper than that, which usually kind of crosses over into the blind debt territory a little bit, but you can use like context clues for the door they're getting through to debt the trap that's a little bit deeper, things like that I have talked about before when I talked about blind debts. But those are less likely to get cleared versus something on the door is pretty obvious. But overall, well, and we'll compare that to passive traps, which of course are something that's much deeper into the point that's being pushed into, as in they already get past the door, they haven't gotten past the trap quite yet, because, you know, an example on like Gully Wash Mid, for example, rather than trapping the choke or trapping big door, you can trap on top of the point or trap the box near choke where you're standing in case the demo just bombs from big door and you want to kill them right away. Things like that are going to be examples of more passive traps that overall are obviously much easier to set up, or rather much safer to set up, because you can set those up while being positioned safely so that you're not caught to whatever Uber they're taking or whatever push the other team is taking, considering the fact they have that advantage to push off of. However, they're overall less successful. It's much easier to clear because A, they're not often in choke points, meaning opponents can just happen to take the, you know, their pathing wide or something to avoid the trap entirely. Or alternatively, well, not alternatively, in fact, in addition, a big component is the fact that there's just much less on the mental stack for your opponents when they're already through the choke point, when they've already forced you guys out. And then they can just kind of be looking around at anything and not have to worry. Obviously, like the players that are responsible for holding the chokes, like the demo and the soldiers, can look at that, but everyone else kind of just freed up to do whatever. So it's much easier to clear passive traps once you expect them. And at a high level, it's pretty easy to expect them as well, because if you see a demo staring at a choke and the choke's not trapped and you don't see the stickies ever get dead, as in he's not spamming you with stickies and deading them that way, which in which case you would know he's deading, then yeah, you get past the choke, no stickies there. He didn't dead anything, so they're probably still up somewhere. They might be a little passive and you might be on higher alert, just paying attention to how the other demo behaves. Speaking of which, if a demo kind of lingers in a door or something like that, and just keeps spotting you as you're pushing, that's very, very much telegraphing the fact that he probably has a trap somewhere that he's watching, and you might want to be a little careful about just holding W into him. And on the flip side, I don't linger for traps, honestly. It can work out sometimes, but I see a lot of demos just have a decent trap up that they're very invested in and just stay in trying to spot it, hoping someone walks over it, and ends up dying for it. And that is part of the downside of passive traps as well, is you just can't, you can't really spot them necessarily when the opponents already take their space, because a lot of the time they are forcing you out of the door by the time that they actually, you know, get over those stickies. So you are going to be resigned to blind deading them sometimes if the opponents take space properly. So yeah, overall, as you can tell from what I've been talking about, the more passive traps are far inferior as far as actually getting kills goes. Yes, you can get kind of creative with what they are, and have some really interesting kind of tech there, I suppose, rather than, I mean, just trapping a door. There's multiple ways to trap just a doorway, and some are quite creative, but overall, just stickies on the door and trusting your reaction time is going to work, you know, just as fine 80% of the time. Versus you get a lot of creativity with passive traps, which is why, you know, you can be kind of partial to them, but they are just inferior as far as getting kills goes most of the time. However, they do have one major advantage, which is that they're really easy to set up, and you can set them up from safety, which is really important. So, as I think that's probably it. We can start to summarize. So overall, as I was talking about at the start, you are looking to trap in general in usually disadvantageous situations, or defending situations is probably the more proper word, because that includes when you're expecting to lose space because you have some disadvantage, or it's even Ubers, but your team doesn't have control of mid, in which case traps make sense in a situation like that. And even just temporary defending positions, like, for example, counter sack. Even if you're the attacking team, you're still defending against the other team's counter sack. In a case like that, traps make sense. There are some niche cases where, you know, missed stickies in like a team fight or a mid fight turns into like a trap or something like that. You can set up a quick trap on like a mid fight, for example. One that's actually nice is like trapping up Tetris on a left side rotational mid, because the other demo might just walk up past their Tetris and die to the trap. So there's little niche cases here and there, but the vast majority of sticky traps you're going to want to get up are in those defending positions, which makes a lot of sense because sticky traps are good when you're defending. But if you're trying to take space, trying to attack offensively, then a lot of the time single deaths are going to get you more value. Carpeting is, you know, maybe kind of a sticky trap. It's all like kind of nebulous what a sticky is actually doing. But you don't want to like set a trap and hope the opponents walk into it, because you don't want to be conceding them space. You want to be taking it. Yeah. So those are the situations in which you primarily want to be looking to set traps. And as far as which type of trap you want to go for is entirely a matter of towing the line between how much time you actually have before you need to be in a safe position. Because no matter what, when the opponents are pushing, you want to be somewhere safe, and you want it to be very easy for you to get out and not be caught, because again, such a valuable class on demo. You do not want to be dying to the opponent's pushing or their aggression. So it's very easy to just put it in those terms. Just make sure that you're safe by the time they push. So in cases where, for example, you know the opponents aren't going to push, let's say that they just pushed into the previous point, and you see that they're stacking 5 people on the point. Well, just by that context, you know that they are not actively pushing into the next point that you're on now. So maybe you can get a more aggro trap on the actual doorway itself a little bit forward. Something better like that. But if that ×5 turns into ×2, that indicates, okay, their combo walked off of the point. They are moving forward. They might be pushing into the next point right now, in which case I might need to set something a little more passive. Or in the case of Uber Disat, it's all a matter of how soon they can take their push. Because if they, for example, kill your medic in an Uber and maybe lose 1 or 2 combat players, let's say 1 combat player in the meantime. So it's kind of sketchy if they push or not. You don't really expect them to push, but of course they have 40 ad now because they killed your medic with an Uber. For those of you who watched that tracking Ubers video, little rule of thumb there. In a case like that, you know that they're going to push, so it's a fine idea to trap the chokes or something. But you know that push isn't going to be happening right now because they have to actually get their Uber first. So in a case like that, you have plenty of time to trap basically whatever you want. In a case like that, you aren't really even designated to just trapping the door that you leave. You might have time to trap both choke points that they might be trying to get through, like 4 stickies on each, something like that. Yeah, and you can really take advantage of the surplus of time you have there. So to harken back to the start, when I talk about this trap is too passive, usually what that means is you had plenty of time to get a more appropriate, deeper, more effective trap up, but instead you trap something very passively when you didn't really need to because the opponents weren't going to be pushing in time. Versus you're caught here can mean many things, but in a sticky trap context is you are trapping too aggressively, the opponents are going to push very soon, and you're way too close to the door trying to get that trap up. So, yeah, if you are caught setting up sticky traps, then it's usually a good indication that you actually didn't have time to trap that, and something to look to why that is in order to improve next time. And likewise, if you find yourself trapping passively, a lot of the time that's what you have to do, but it's important to kind of interrogate that and look at that situation and actually think, okay, is this appropriate? Do I actually need to trap this passively, or do I have time to get more aggressive sticky traps up? Especially at a lower level, teams are quite slow to push a lot of the time, so you might be able to get away with trapping more aggressively. But once the pace of the game speeds up a bit, it actually, in my opinion, becomes a little easier to tell what kind of stickies you can get up when, because teams just tend to be more methodical, I guess, or predictable in that sense. But anyway, I have probably babbled long enough, so I will call things there. Hope you all enjoyed, and I will see you all next time.